if you are a junior and you've worked with a senior at some point in your career, they'll have said, no, we shouldn't do that because premature optimization is the root of, all evil. But then, like, what is premature optimization? Like, when do I, the junior, know what's premature and what isn't? If you then dig deeper, then you'll find something like Yagni. Like, you ain't gonna need it. Like, if you need to build something, maybe if you can postpone that, maybe you'll end up not having to write it. And that saves you time. That's cool. But also, as a junior, you don't always know whether or not you need something until you've built it, because you haven't built up that experience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob O'Sell, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, joined by my very favorite co-host, Danny Thompson. Danny is the Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how are you doing?
I'm here. Doing well. It's hot in Texas, but
yes,
the keyboard is even hotter because I feel like I've been coding nonstop, and I'm getting a lot done right now.
So just the friction of your fingers on the keys. You're burning through.
Just an average day at This.Labs, what can I say?
All right, well, we are very excited to be joined by Killian Valkov. Killian is the founder at Polypane. Killian, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's not absurdly hot here, so I'm doing fine.
That's great. Yes, I think it's been that kind of year this year, I feel like, in a lot of places. Except, weirdly, for our listeners in San Francisco, who are listening to this and going, what are you guys talking about? I was just seeing this in the news that apparently it has been like one of the coldest years in like a decade or a couple decades in Silicon Valley. They were just like, where did summer go, basically? So, weird how it works out, I guess. The rest of us would like some of that cold weather if you could please ship it. Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us, Killian. To start off, I introduced you as the founder at Polypane. Polypane is such an interesting product, sort of self-described as a web developers who care about their craft and users. A really cool desktop browser that has things for like responsive web design, accessibilities, SEO, performance, and things of this nature. And we can talk a little bit about like what that tool does. Feel free. But one of the things that's been fascinating, I thought, is that it's been a couple years. And I've noticed like you're really popular and like really active on Mastodon, on Blue Sky and things of that. And I've noticed that like my Twitter feeds and my social media feeds have really split. And a lot of the communities around like SEO, around performance, around accessibility, CSS sometimes too, seem to have migrated like a lot towards Blue Sky, and maybe AI and a few other different sort of practices sort of stayed on Twitter. What has the experience been like for you as a developer of a tool in this space, as an advocate who's trying to get people to care about these things? Like, how has it been for you now that the community has sort of fractured in this way?
Yeah, so I think what's really tempting to think, or what used to be really tempting to think, is that everyone is on Twitter, because it felt like that, like 2-3 years ago. It just felt like, everyone was on Twitter. So if you put something out on Twitter, then everyone will see it. And of course, that's no longer true. But it turns out that it was never really true, because the vast majority of developers are not on Twitter because they're not insane. And it's just a fairly small group of people that are on Twitter. So if you just use, the big one, Twitter, you are actually missing out on reaching a whole lot of people. So like knowing that made it less scary to just say, what X has become is not a place I want to be at or contribute to or feel comfortable with even. So I can just discard that with almost no negative effects when it comes to whatever you want to call reach for my product or for me personally. So if I now look at the people on Blue Sky, or mostly the people I still followed or I used to follow on Twitter, it's just none of the other persons that also like frequently bumped into topics and derailed it. For whatever reason. So it's kind of like the cozy thing that Twitter used to be a decade ago, if we want to make us all feel very old. So yeah, so that's been the thing with like social media, but like the big thing I think most people tend to forget is that there's just a really small part of the developer community that is on Twitter, is on Blue Sky, is on Mastodon, and yeah, that's
So I
not
guess
the only place you should be at.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting is that I remember, though, like cultivating, you're right, not everybody's on Twitter for sure, but there was so many varied people. And, you know, maybe I'm the weird one, but I'd like to cultivate my feed to have people who challenged my thinking. I can think of some really notable people that used to post a lot, that I saw a lot, who challenged my understanding of things like accessibility and performance and things of that nature. And you know, I see less of it now because I just don't have so many different panes open all the time. You know, sometimes I focus more on one or the other or none at all. You know, Danny, I know you do a lot, obviously, with meetups. You do a lot with conferences as well. I guess my question just broadly is, do we have enough places to find each other these days? Like, we kind of have fractured down to the groups of people we want to spend the most amount of time with. But what I've missed is a really obvious place to go and just survey some things that I wasn't thinking about. And do you guys feel like we're lacking enough places to do that? Or is it's just harder and now you have to put in the effort?
Yeah, I will say it feels very segmented compared to where it was before. I don't feel like there is that central news location of what somebody's working on. With that being said, it's kind of why I've put so much effort into building the community in Dallas, because now I have like thousands of developers in the Dallas area that I'm connected with, where we talk in like a Discord or something like that. And I think that's where a lot of that is going to have to start being the norm. Unfortunately, is there probably will never ever be again a centralized place where you can get everything. And so we can reminisce and miss it as much as we want, but we can really adapt to where we're finding our communities and kind of growing with it. But I do love where, even if I wasn't necessarily involved directly with a community, I was still finding out things that they were like geeked out about, and I was able to find new subjects and things like that. So I do miss that for sure. But I do love that people are taking somewhat ownership of where they're consuming their media from, and I'm a big advocate for that. So big wins to everybody involved with that.
Yeah, so if you zoom out a little bit, I think what's happening is like people are moving back, luckily, to meetups and conferences, even though they're all having a very hard time. But they're also sort of retreating into closed off communities like Slack or Discord, where there's a little more social control. And of course, like that's a much safer space for a lot of people, which is very valuable. And again, if you look at like 10 years ago, then, you know, we were all like posting through our nights going out on Twitter. We were tweeting out the photos, or not tweeting out the photos. We were posting the photos on Instagram, and then we were sharing our location live through Foursquare. And we were all doing that. And now, like, most people look at that and they go, well, I don't actually want everyone, like literally capital E, everyone, to know where I am and what I'm doing there right now. So I think a lot of people are a little more wise to curate what they share a bit more. Which in general is a good thing. And it's also because back then, if you posted something now, people that were on Twitter now would see it now, and then it would essentially be gone.
Yeah.
Whereas now or like current day, like Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, there is no chronological timeline. Yeah, you can click to it, but that's not what they feed you, literally. It's all like trying to keep you on the platform, having some algorithm that optimizes for a thing that is not your happiness, that is not like your enjoyment, but they're optimizing for something they care about. And then if you look at all those closed communities, like Discord, Slack, they're all still just linear. Like you see the latest messages. You can go through the effort to scroll back, but that moment's gone. And you can reply on it, but you know, it'll be a new moment. you won't have like flame bait from 2 weeks ago showing up on your feeds, being outraged about something that has already been resolved a long time ago.
Yeah, some of it is the algorithm too. I mean, we've seen Medium and Dev 2 wane a little bit as far as their influence. And I think some of that is built to a lot of these algorithms now de-emphasize or deprioritize or punish you for directly linking to content that leaves the website. And that's what I miss the most is like, bring back the RSS feeds, bring back Follow Friday, bring back the, hey, I read this article, I think you'd like it too. But, the algorithm really pushes us away from that. And I think that has really made it harder to spread awesome ideas and to discover new thinkers and new devs that are coming up that aren't already in your circles. And, again, that's why I think meetups now, like you said, I mean, let's work with what we have. The meetups are super important. The conferences are super important, and those Discord communities are very important to be plugged into at least a few of them. Get to meet some new people, and start to maybe splinter out from there for sure. All right, we have more of our conversation to come, but first we'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, This.Labs. This.Labs is your trusted expert in modern web development and AI consulting. This.Labs is not in the business of chasing trends, but we're in the practice of moving technology forward with discipline, clarity, and intent. Our team brings deep engineering expertise paired with strategic insight to help modern enterprises build smarter, faster, and more adaptive systems. From seamless LLM integrations to the development of AI-driven applications, we ensure that every solution is designed not only to meet today's challenges, but to unlock tomorrow's capabilities. We work with clients like Google, Microsoft, Stripe, Bill.com, and many other great organizations. Check us out at ai.this.co. That's ai.thisdot.co. Big thanks to This.Labs for sponsoring this episode and for their commitment to advancing the developer community. All right, back to our episode. So, Killian, we started by introducing you as the founder of Polypane, and I love this idea of Polypane as being a browser for developers who care about their craft. And I think we want to talk about a little bit about what some of those things mean, like what it means to care about your craft in concrete terms. Like what are some of the things that developers who care about their craft know, and what have they learned, especially in the front end world? I guess for you, do you have any way that you generally summarize this as like, what are some of the things that a modern web developer should be doing to emphasize their care for their craft?
Yeah, so I think that there are some like very obvious things that developers care about or are made or trained to care about. One is visual accuracy, because if you have a design comp and you implement it and it's wrong, then the designer is going to be sad. So you get trained to focus on that. If you write really poor code and your website doesn't show up in Google, then your sales team is going to be sad, your marketing team is going to be sad. So you get trained to care about SEO at some level. But there are so many things when it comes to the web, when it comes to websites, that no one externally is going to, or no one externally in a position of power is going to tell you to do better. And those are things like very explicitly accessibility. But accessibility is very broad. Accessibility is also like you knowing that you can make the close button just the little X icon, or you can make the close button the little X icon and 10 pix padding around the little X icon so that it's just slightly easier to click for everyone. And it's stuff like that where, do you care about the meta tags that you have? Are you adding ones that, give extra information to the places you care about, that help create a better experience for people sharing your pages on social media, which then makes them more likely to share that. Stuff like that, where it's not just, does this website look like the picture, but does this website react and in a way that is nice to use?
Many front-end developers, software developers in general, especially those from maybe non-traditional backgrounds, right? They may skip some fundamentals along the way. They may skip some of the processes. And I know in our discussions we've talked about guiding principles. What do you think some of these guiding principles could theoretically be if someone's trying to build something of higher levels of quality? Like, what are some things that they should be considering or thinking about, especially at like the front end level?
Yeah. So I think there's really two aspects of that question. Like the one aspect is like purely on the programming side of things, and the other is purely on like the output side of things. Like what principles do you want your website to have, or your web app, or whatever you're building? If we focus on that latter part for just a bit, I think there's a lot of things where front-end developers are sort of expected to also have usability knowledge and to also know about UX fundamentals, and to sort of like draw the rest of the owl when it comes to getting a design comp and then figuring out, like, maybe you have a design comp for mobile and for desktop, and then it's up to the front-end developer to figure out, like, how does it look like in between that? So front-end developers are expected to have a certain level of knowledge when it comes to like design principles, when it comes to spacing, typography, stuff like that. But what then gets forgotten is that, you know, there are also principles regarding the code that you send literally down the wire, whether that's like HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, because at the end of the day, that's what you send to browsers. So knowing how to make sure that, you know, you're sending CSS that works for the 95% of users, because that's the cutoff you've chosen of visitors that you have, and you gather data on the browsers they use. And you make sure that you have CSS that fixes that. That's a quality aspect. You make sure that your HTML is valid. And that's a very tricky one, because browsers will do everything in their might to make sure that, like, regardless of how crappy a website is, to still show the content on that website. Because HTML fundamentally is a documenting language built to communicate content. It's built to share documents. So embedded into the logic of HTML is, well, if anything goes wrong, at least make sure that the content is still visible. And you can see that in, for example, if you have an element and that element isn't large enough for the content that it has, by default, the browser will show the content outside of that element. It will overflow that content. And instead of like clipping it into that content so that the interface still looks the way you expect it to. And the reason browsers make that choice is because they have said, well, content is more important than looks. So if there is something in your website causing your end user to miss content, then the choice we as a browser make, unless you have made other choices, is to show the content, because that's our goal. And speaking from experience, your life as a front-end developer becomes much easier once you start to work like with that, instead of like against it. Instead of trying to very strictly control how everything looks, you can hand over quite a lot to the browser and have the browser make those choices if you know like what are the principles that this browser operates on. So that's like the front end part. And then for the programming part, what I think a lot of front end developers have in common is that they don't have like a traditional like computer science, hardcore programming, Lisp, whatever background. Like if I look at myself, I'm actually trained as a designer, and I just sort of tricked myself into building a browser, which doesn't sound like a smart thing and probably isn't, but you know, that this is my life now. But that also means that there are a lot of like fundamentals, as it were, or tricks, if you want to go like the complete other direction, that I just miss out on, that I don't have those guidelines. So I've been like training myself over the past like 20 years to find ways to help me like sort of trick myself into doing the right thing when it comes to like real programming, like the massive amount of JavaScript I write to build a browser. And yeah, so I can start rattling off principles, but maybe we can do that a little more structured.
Well, what's interesting is that I think a lot of people have, some amount of, they might be listening to you talk and having a little bit of imposter syndrome, because I think that especially juniors and mids that are coming up, I mean, honestly, some seniors who are sitting there and hearing things like, there's just so much to learn, so much to learn about security, so much to learn about accessibility, so much to learn about performance that I don't know. And, if the answer is I just need to be better and I need to be more aware of it, it's like, yeah, I know that. I know I don't know that.
Yeah.
And what I've told people, I'm curious what you think, is that one of the principles that is strongest for being able to operate in this space where there are things out there that you're not expert in is to be curious and to really look for prior art. Like, I think what I find is most effective for me, and what I see amongst engineers who are most effective at operating in spaces they know the least about, is if you have a really strong sense to seek prior art. It could be code that already exists. It could be an entirely different product. How do they do this? Like, hey, we're about to do this kind of user experience pattern. What other website in the wild has that pattern, and how did they accomplish it, and how did they implement it? Or maybe they chose not to implement it at all, and maybe we should think about why that is. And I find that like it's almost like a Socratic method that it's best sometimes to just ask, where else have we seen this before? Because we are probably not inventing the wheel for the first time. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's absolutely right, and that's also so I used to have a web agency, and like one of the rules we had was we could like build anything for our customers. Our designers could come up with anything, but they did have to have like an example of what they had in mind in real code somewhere. And if they couldn't have that, and it didn't have to look the same, it didn't have to like be the exact thing, but like if a designer went, well, and then it like swooshes from there to there, like, okay, show us. You have this idea, find something that looks like it, and you can then go, yeah, but it needs to swoosh in a different way, or it needs to swoosh longer, or whatever. But you need to have, for lack of a better word, like prototypes, like of varying like fidelity. A prototype can also just be like, check out this website, it does the thing. Because now you have something to talk about together. You can be like, okay, but this aspect makes it really difficult to implement because of this and this and this. But we can also choose to go this route, which is like 90% of what you want, but it only takes 10% of the time. What do you say about that? So that's definitely a skill you should cultivate as a front-end developer. But like at the end of the day, that's also just like, you need to be able to communicate with people and work together with people. So that's definitely a part of it.
As we're talking about principles and things to like focus on and skills you can grow in as a developer, it starts making me think of something like working in companies. I've had the luxury to work in like a lot of Fortune 500 companies. There's sometimes considerations around trade-offs, right? Like, how would you expect certain principles to help developers who may not necessarily, have strong instincts for trade-offs, like choosing between like performance or readability or accessibility, speed, etc. Like, what are considerations they should be making around that?
So there's a couple I think that are really nice. So the W3C, the organization that like comes up with the internet, they have a set of principles for how they approach new features, which is, and I'm going to paraphrase this badly, but it's users, so that's end users, over authors, over implementers. So authors is us, people building websites, over implementers, which is people building browsers, over specification writers. So the W3C is that last one, the specification writers. So for every choice they have to make, they go like, is this best for it should be best for the user. And if we have a choice where something is better for authors but worse for users, then we're going to pick the user. If something is easier for us as spec writers but it's harder for implementers, well, tough luck. We're going to do the thing that's better for implementers and not the thing that's better for spec writers. So I think that's a really interesting cascade to think about, and also one that you can come up with for your own company. You can be accessibility over performance, over SEO, over database optimization, whatever. That's what I would choose, but your company might choose differently. And I think having that conversation is really useful, and that you can also, there's so much stuff that ties together here. But if you then look at something like the Agile Manifesto, which has been perverted into a whole bunch of things. But one thing that the Agile Manifesto itself, it's just a few lines, but what they do is they don't say people are important, because everyone agrees people are important, but they say people over process. So whenever you have a conflict between something to do with your team or a process, the Agile Manifesto can help you and say, well, actually, no, some people might feel very strongly about this particular process, but we're going to choose people because we have agreed we put people over process. So I think having principles that do that, where it's like this, but instead of this, are much more powerful, because at the end of the day, everyone is going to agree, accessibility is important, SEO is important, marketing speed is important. Yeah, they're all important, but which is more important? So I think that's really important for teams to think about, more so than individual developers.
You say something interesting here where I do agree to a certain degree. With a lot of our choices, we end up putting certain considerations in front of people, right? And obviously, modern principles are kind of emerging, some are changing. Are there any specific principles that we should be teaching alongside some of the classics? When you think of, some people still teach ES5 level items in order to have people appreciate ES6. Are there principles that we would say maybe aren't necessarily applicable now that we might adjust along the way to what we're doing these days? I know an accessible first approach is kind of one thing that comes to my mind immediately, but what are some other considerations that you may be thinking around that?
So if I look at the principles that I grab to most often in my work, none of them are really new. There'll be things that some very smart person said 30 years ago, and it's still true today. But what has helped me a lot is digging a little deeper into those things. So, for example, if you are a junior and you've worked with a senior, at some point in your career, they'll have said, no, we shouldn't do that because premature optimization is the root of... Okay, all evil. We can cut that out.
Okay,
I was
good.
hoping for you
that was completely the correct answer, but I felt dumb. I was I don't know if I've heard anybody finish that statement, but yes.
Yeah. But then, what is premature optimization? When do I, the junior, know what's premature and what isn't? So if you then dig deeper, then you'll find something like Yagni. You ain't gonna need it. If you need to build something, maybe if you can postpone that, maybe you'll end up not having to write it. And that saves you time. That's cool. But also, as a junior, you don't always know whether or not you need something until you've built it, because you haven't built up that experience. So if you then look further, there's something that Kent Beck has said, which is make it run, make it right, make it fast. And now you have a set of steps to follow. I need to build a new function. Sure, I need to just make it work. It doesn't have to be right, because that's step 2. I just need to make it work. I need to have something on the screen. It can be fake data. It can be, it can be super slow. It just needs to work. So I can code until I'm at that point. Like, okay, the thing works, but it's definitely not good, but it works. Step 1. What's step 2? Am I going to optimize my solution right now? Because, things need to be fast. No, because step 2 is make it right. So I'm not going to waste time optimizing code now that I'm probably going to throw away because I have a logic error somewhere that I haven't figured out yet. So now that I've made it work, now I'm just going to make sure that it's correct, that my tests pass, that it doesn't break when I enter weird characters, or that it also works with a keyboard, or that, all the things that come into probably your definition of done if you, again, work in a team. Then you're at the point where it works, and it works right, and you've done all the work to make it fit the definition of done. Now is the time to make it fast. So now you can start optimizing. And then when it's fast, the story is done. So you've gone from premature optimization is bad to, okay, now I have a 3-step plan to make the thing that I need to build. And I know exactly what to do at what point, and I'm not going to get stuck optimizing something that I can then throw away 2 days later. And that's a much nicer principle, and it's one I reach back to at least once a week, where I'm okay, but what I'm doing right now isn't at the right step, so I need to figure out at what stage am I with this functionality that I'm writing and focus just on that.
I'm curious, so we talked about some things that maybe people should be noting and that we believe that would help people out in their careers. What about on the other side? What kind of advice is out there that you think people are giving all the time that maybe they should not pay as close of attention to? And I'll put one on the table here, which I think might be controversial. And it's that if I could snap my fingers and delete one piece of advice from existence, and if anybody ever hearing it, it would be don't repeat yourself. I have seen more egregious crimes committed in the name of dry than any other piece of advice ever given. And I have just spent so much time training my teams to ignore this piece of feedback. And if people are wondering why that is, it's because oftentimes the way that you don't repeat yourself is to discover reusable patterns. But the way that people will often do this is they'll just extract code that is incidentally similar to an extracted function, which means you can't read one method in one byte. You have to read it across 5 different files, and then you go to change the behavior of that thing, and it wasn't meant to be different in one of the 5 places it's used. And so then you start accumulating all these Boolean flags, and nothing can be understandable. So this is kind of how it can snowball into unexpected complexity and actually save you nothing. But is there any other advice, Kelly, that you think is one of these ones that you hear a lot, but that maybe hasn't been useful to you think maybe people shouldn't pay as close attention to?
To expand on that one, because dry as an idea is perfect, is the right thing, but again, don't repeat yourself, when, why, that's not helpful. What is helpful is this other idiom, which is the rule of 3. And you can go to Wikipedia to read a lot about that. But the rule of 3 is essentially you need to write something 3 times before you know how to abstract it into something that doesn't repeat itself. So if you're a programmer and you build something and you get a new feature request or ticket or whatever, and you're oh, that's kind of like that other thing, the rule of 3 tells you to just copy your code from your first implementation, paste the code, change it, commit that code again, and then only after your 3rd time can you go back and figure out what actually is the thing between these 3 implementations that makes sense to abstract. And then again, what usually happens is that there tends to be not that much overlap, because things are subtly different in ways that you couldn't have anticipated. And what now was a very easy 3 times just copy and paste the code, which takes no time and change it to do the thing you want to do is now significantly faster than you having written like the abstraction factory generator factory for the thing that you now don't get to use in your second implementation because it just doesn't fit. So again, there I think what a lot of like the more general advice or the shorthands that senior developers use, like this needs to be dry, this is premature optimization, this is, whatever. That's advice that can be harmful to juniors because it's not prescriptive advice. It doesn't tell you what to do, it just tells you what to avoid. But if you don't know what that is, then you don't have a way to avoid it, and it doesn't actually help you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, tell me if you agree with this as we wrap things up, which is that we might have made a lot of people very insecure about the fact that they feel like they're following good advice, but now they're not sure whether they're following good advice or bad advice. Mm-hmm. My thought process in this and what I would recommend to people is that you should just continue forward the best way you know how and the best way you think how, but do it with a humbleness and look for the people either on your team or in your community where you can ask questions and say, hey, this is what I did. What do you think? How do you do it? And I think that's how you continue to grow. Do the best you can now with what you know, but seek out that understanding from other people and those perspectives from other people, because that's where you'll mature as a developer. I don't want to scare people off of every piece of advice out there.
And that's also how I learned things. Like, I've been programming for 20 years now. I didn't start out knowing what like Gall's law was, and I still couldn't recite it to you. But I know, because I've read about it like at some point in probably the past 5 years, that it's like this saying that says that if a system is very complex and it works, that it can only have been created from something that is small and works. So if you want to build something that's big and works, you need to start with something that's small and works. Because if your task is build the universe, then you're going to fail. But if your task is like build a drop down, that's fine. And then, from the drop down, maybe you can add a search field, and now it's a combo box. And maybe you can add icons, and now it's a bigger thing, a bigger thing, a bigger thing, a bigger thing. And that then helps me realize that, I shouldn't like eat the whole elephant. I should start small. And I came across that in a conference talk somewhere, and I looked it up and I was like, hey, that sounds clever. That sounds like something I can like keep in the back of my mind as I code. Like, am I building something too big? Can I make it smaller? That'll be nice. So I think that's definitely good advice. Like, search it out, and if there's, if a senior says something to you and you're not quite sure what that is, like maybe they overuse the word idempotent, like go look that up, and then
you gotta hit me like that.
I mean, I use it more often than I should as well. I'm guilty, but it's a nice word, and it describes something that's very valuable. But it's not something that you use in everyday conversations. So if you don't know the word idempotent, that's not weird. But you can go look it up, and you can be like, oh, hey, that's like how I write most of my functions, which is what my reaction was when I first came across that. Like, yeah, and that makes sense, because now it's safe to just call functions over and over again, because they always do the same thing. Idempotent means your function always does the same thing with the same arguments. And it has no side effects. So if you're a rec dev, you know what side effects are. And this is where that comes from. So, words aren't scary, and there's a lot of resources out there that explain it in like human language.
Yeah, for real.
Like you don't have to go hardcore into like Haskell and monads to learn about functional programming. You can just be like, okay, like all my functions do one thing. Yeah, let's start with that. and then you're also doing functional programming, and you can grow from that.
Awesome.
So yeah, start small.
Well, this has been a great conversation. For people that are interested in maybe keeping this conversation going, maybe they ask you for a few more of your favorite pieces of advice, or
Sure.
that are interested in looking into what Polypane is, can you help people understand where they can find you and find the tool you're working on online?
Yeah, so my website is kilianvelkhoff.com, and you have links to my Blue Sky and Mastodon, etc. over there. You can find Polypane at polypane.app, or polypane.com, or polypane.dev, or polypane.rocks, because I, like every other developer, have a compulsion to buy domain names. And you can find everything there. I've documented all the features. You can try it for free for 2 weeks. I don't need your credit card because I just don't want to be responsible for that, to be frank. So yeah, go try it out. Tell me what you think. I love hearing from people what they think about Polypane.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. Thanks, of course, to our guest, Kilian. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. We'll put all the links for Kilian down below. You heard some of them right there so that you can find him and Polypane online. As for me, you can find me online at RoboCell. You can find Danny online at DThompsonDev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. As we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that This. Is dedicated to guiding companies through their modernization and AI transformation journeys. This.Labs is a tech consultancy that specializes in amplifying your technical capabilities, whether it's expanding your dev team with seasoned professionals or streamlining your project's journey from ideation to deployment. We work with clients like Google, Microsoft, PayPal, and more. Check us out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, everybody. See you next time.